All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. So we're going to pick this up on page number 15 in your student guide. And here is the process by which we're going to produce your primary hand receipt as a commander. So on the top of page number 15, before I go into the application, here are the key things that I want you to understand. And it says, all property received, example given, lateral transfer, receipt from the warehouse is immediately added to both the commander's primary hand receipt and the CDR SLOPE when the post goods receipt is processed. So PGR is an acronym that you're going to hear all the time as a commander. At the end of the day, all that's happening is the receipt is processed in the system. Hey, from a legacy perspective, we really had to wait on the property book officer to add that item to the primary hand receipt. GCSS Army, it's streamlined. So once that receipt is processed, and generally speaking, that receipt is going to be processed at the warehouse, and you see that notation there, usually that's what local or command policy will dictate. So now as a commander, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to identify all of the equipment that's currently on your primary hand receipt. We have a capability based on particular layouts, and you'll see how I walk this out, whereby not only do you see what's on your primary hand receipt, but you have the ability to see the further assignment of that equipment. So again, you'll see how we walked it out in the handout. All right, so I'm getting ready to go into this transaction code. So step number one in the command field, you should be more familiar with the command field /November /ISD FPS /DISP _MAT_SIT, and I press enter. So we simplify and we say, hey, we're going into the MAT SIT report. Now there's multiple capabilities that exist within this particular transaction code. I want to start by talking about organizational flexibility view. This is the view that we're going to utilize for the purpose of creating the commander's primary hand receipt. There's an added capability whereby we can produce roll-ups. Let's say now you're not the commander, you're the S4. You want a roll-up of all the equipment in your parent organization. We have the ability through that organizational flexibility view. Later on in the lesson, what you're going to see me do is come back and now select materials management view, and this is where we're going to produce a sub-hand receipt. And this is where we're afforded the opportunity to look at what's in a warehouse or what's in our supply room or what's in our maintenance facilities. All right, so step number two, I'm going to go ahead and type in the UIC in the force element field. You can see I'm using UIC Whiskey Echo 35 Alpha 0. We're still looking at that same distribution company that's a part of the support squadron. All right, and then from there, I'm going to deselect provisions. And I want to remind you, so in the previous lesson, we talked about stock relevant to the major end item, provisions relevant to something that's expendable or durable in nature. And in this case, the commander's primary hand receipt is only going to list the major end items. So that's really the rationale behind deselecting provisions. All right, and then I execute. So now, the very next thing that we're going to do is down at the bottom of page number 15, we're going to focus our attention on the serial number column. Now, contained within this column are note cards. To simplify what's happening here, that note card is signifying the fact that that item is accounted for by serial number, and that's an item that has components, or that's an item that requires maintenance. So it's all predicated on what they call a serial number profile. Now, the good news is we have the ability to look at all of the history associated with that single piece of equipment by clicking on that note card in the serial number column. So for example, I'm pointing to a forklift. I can see that there are 4 on the commander's primary hand receipt. Watch what happens when I click on that note card. Now, what it does is it displays what we call an equipment record. So I'm looking at the 4 equipment records associated with the forklifts. Now I have the ability to highlight one of those records. I can click on the details icon. And from there, if you notice step number 6, it brings us into a different process called IE03, and I can look at all of the associated history. So look at what I'm looking at here. I can see preventive maintenance where there was an annual done in February. I can see work orders where the vehicle won't start. So the good news, from the time that we actually converted from legacy into GCSS Army, all of this data begins to become archived. I personally think the audit trail that exists at GCSS Army is quite extensive. So I'm just showing you an added capability as a commander that you have in the system. Hey, likewise, you can do the same thing as an S4. Maybe there's a situation where a piece of equipment which causes you to maybe conduct causative research. All right, so we pick this up now on page number 17. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the back arrow again so I can get to the original report. And now what I want to be able to do is I want to go ahead and change the layout. The layout that we're going to use is what I'm going to consider to be an asset visibility report. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a second. So on page 17, step number 8, so we're going to go to where our layouts are shown. And I'm going to choose layout. And you can see the layout that I'm going to choose is titled US CDR PHR. So let me explain what's happening in this choose layout window. So you have layouts that are default settings within the system, but then you have other layouts that have been created by other users. Now those layouts that have been created by other users, they're afforded the opportunity to make those layouts public. So in essence, I'm looking at a layout that another person has created and allowed that layout to be viewable by all. All right, so I click on the US CDR PHR. That layout's applied. Look what just happened on my screen. So right now, if you were the commander of this company, you can acknowledge the fact that you have a discharger, electric static. You have 6 that you're directly responsible for. Those 6 have been further assigned or further sub-hand receipted to storage location Charlie Oscar Uniform Yankee, and that storage location has been identified as the SSA. We can look at last movements. Again, the audit trail that exists within the confines of the system is quite extensive. So if you look at page number 18, we have the ability to export this information into Excel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the report. You can see step 10 on page number 18. I right-click on the report and I choose Spreadsheet. All right, so now it wants to save it in SAP. I don't want to do that. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and I'll just call this the PHR, and then I'll choose Save. Now I want to kind of jump ahead here for just a moment, and I want to talk about your pre-change of command inventory, or not pre-change, but your initial inventory as the incoming commander. So one of the things that I'm going to advocate you do is I'm going to advocate you going to the property book officer and saying, hey, Chief, hey, sir, man, could I get a copy of the primary hand receipt in Excel? Hey, can you change the layout so it shows me not only what I'm inventorying, but how that equipment has been further assigned? And I'm assuming that you're going to maintain this student guide. And ideally, what you would do is once you completed the inventory of a specific piece of equipment, hey, my recommendation, start highlighting. Hey, let's imagine this item has already been inventoried. There's no issues with that item. I'll highlight it in green. Hey, maybe we have a container here that has a serial number discrepancy. Maybe I'll highlight that in yellow. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, the inventory is complete and I have one item that is yet to be located. So it's just, I guess it's just a technique that you can utilize going forward as the incoming commander who's now responsible to inventory all of the unit's equipment. All right, so we're done in Excel. I'm going to come out of the Excel file, and now I'm back in the application. Now, step number 15, really speaks to how the primary hand receipt would be produced. So there's a more functions icon here that I'm going to select. And if I click on that icon, a menu appears. Now, what I'm not telling you in the handout, I can also right-click on the report and get that same menu to appear. And now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to choose Print Hand Receipt. Now, as we're waiting for the hand receipt to print on the bottom of page number 19, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting those key data elements, if you will. We talked briefly about MPOs in the previous lesson, a material planning object associated with a line item number in GCSS Army. Another thing that you would want to recognize is the line item numbers in and of themselves are now included in the MPO description column. And I'll point that out when the document actually opens. There's another field titled PBIC, and I'll share with you the information that is generally found in that particular field. And now on page number 20, one of the most important columns, in my opinion, outside of what you have on hand, is called DLA, Date Last Action. Now we're looking at a Julian date by which the equipment last moved. Okay, that Julian date serves as the audit trail. If something happens with that equipment, now you have a start point for conducting your own causative research. All right, so let me just recap. So I see the material planning object. To the right of that, I see the line item number. So I'm pointing to 70209 November. Hey, in the PBIC field, that number 0809 represents the category of equipment. And I don't want to get overly technical. It just breaks down the overall category of equipment that it belongs to, if you will. I can see the authority is 2. I can see why it is that we actually have that equipment in our formation. I can see the complete national stock number associated with that item. I can see the data last action for this item. So nothing has transpired with this particular item since, let's see, the 346th day of 2018. And the current quantity on hand is 2. Now I can see the 2 serial numbers associated with that equipment. Now, one thing that I'm not looking at here that I see an example of on page number 20, toward the top here, it says, in addition to the primary hand receipt, GCSSA identifies equipment that's either inbound or outbound to the organization as noted below. So we have an inbound in-transit hand receipt. We have an outbound in-transit hand receipt. Before we touch on page number 20, the last thing that I want you to understand, and this is different from legacy, when you look at these primary hand receipts in GCSS Army, they're only going to show what it is that you physically have on hand. Okay, there's a transaction code. You can see this toward the top of page 20 called ZProStat. It's a purchase order status report process that you could go into, and now you can see everything that's on order for your unit. We could do that from a property book perspective. We could do that from a unit supply maintenance perspective, etc. All right, so again, without being overly technical, on page number 20, I'm showing you both the inbound and the outbound and the other transaction codes in GCSS Army that you would leverage to research why an item is inbound. Generally speaking, it's inbound because of a lateral transfer. You're the gaining organization. Generally speaking, the outbound, that means maybe that piece of equipment is unserviceable, getting turned into the warehouse, or maybe the other reason would be that that item is now being laterally transferred and you're the losing organization. So I personally really value the in-transit hand receipts of what it is that they reveal to the commander. All right, so now look at page number 21. So now we can progress from the primary hand receipt to a sub-hand receipt. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back and I'm just going to refresh the screen, and I'll just now for a second time /November /ISD fps/DISP_mat sit per center. Okay, so now what I alluded to earlier is now I'm gonna, because I'm wanting to produce that sub-hand receipt, I'm gonna change from organizational flexibility view to a materials management view. In the materials management view selection, I'm gonna enter plant 2000, and that's something that you may be unfamiliar with. So plant 2000 relevant to property book, unit supply and maintenance. Plant 2001 relevant to the warehouse. So we're entering plant 2000 because again, we're at the organizational level. Now, the storage location, I'm going to utilize the storage location that's included in the handout, that being Charlie Oscar, Hotel 3, and then I'm going to execute. So now in this case, I'm looking at all of the equipment that has been assigned to maintenance. Mind you, I'm looking at the storage location associated with a different UIC, that's okay. But I'm looking at all of the equipment that's been sub-hand receipted to our maintenance facility. Now, what I'm going to do, and in this case, I'm going back to more functions. And now, instead of choosing print hand receipt, if I come down a little bit, I'm going to choose print sub-hand receipt. All right, so now, as we progress to page number 21, we have an example of what that sub-hand receipt actually looks like. And the key data elements, in this case, I'm still going to gravitate toward that DLA, toward that data last action, because now that serves as the audit trail that shows the movement of that equipment to that particular document. Hey, on page 22, there's a lot of information here, so I really want to capitalize on the opportunity to talk about the flow of accountability. Okay, look at toward the top here. It says, regarding the internal flow of accountability, the regulation is clear. No restriction on the number of times property can be sub-hand receipted, but under normal circumstances, should not exceed from the commander to the supervisor to the user. Okay, let's travel back in time. I think the vast majority of you were very much a part of the process, meaning you signed for all your platoon's equipment. I think the commander developed you through the process or guided you through the process, and now you have the responsibility to take all of that equipment and you further sub-hand receipted it internally. I suspect that you further sub-hand receipted that equipment internally by creating a manual DA form 2062. So now, as a current commander, here are the things that you have to give thought to. So now, one of the challenges is GCSS Army utilizes PDF files. Legacy utilized Microsoft Excel. So now it carries with it a different set of complexities. So here it says, as commanders, you must determine how the internal flow of accountability will be executed between yourself and the end user. Likely options for you might be. So I'm writing this. So you can best believe if I was your property book officer, I would assume responsibility for coaching you through the process. I talked about early on in the very first lesson about the manual DA form 2062 and whether or not it still has value today. It does. However, we should be leveraging the system and what the system affords. All right, so option number one, property is divided by MTO paragraph number, and the platoon leader signs for all paragraphs, storage locations, if you will, under their operational control. Option number one is what I'm always going to advocate. Option number two, senior individual assigned to that paragraph signs for all property. In this case, the platoon leader and the platoon sergeant would assume supervisory responsibility. Now, if you look at the next area, it talks about sub-hand receipt holders will generally issue property to their subordinate choosing one or two methods. Number one, creating that 2062, or number two, basically capitalizing on that automated hand receipt. And personally, that's the one I recommend. However, what has to happen is there has to be a conversion of this PDF file into Microsoft Word. So now a simple change can be made to that document. So if you look at page number 23, once that document is converted from a PDF file, okay, so basically what's going to happen is they're going to have access to Adobe Pro. I'm led to believe that you can do this in DC, Adobe DC. It'll allow you to export that document into Microsoft Word. Now, in a Word environment, look at the top of page number 23. The only thing that would have to be changed is the from and the to in the header, okay? So undoubtedly, to me, that's a lot easier than spending unnecessary amounts of time to try to go through and type all of this stuff on a manual hand receipt. All right, so outside of the flow, outside of leveraging the automated hand receipt, I want to talk about the way by which we're going to update all documentation. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and save this sub hand receipt to my computer because I don't want a timeout of the system. And I'll just save it to my desktop. I'll just call this sub HR. And I didn't intend to do this, but let me see whether or not I can actually now take this document. So I'm going to come out of GCSS Army. Let me see if I can take, I have DC, Adobe DC on my computer. And let me see if I can take this one document and export it to Microsoft Word. So while I'm doing that, let's go back and let's look at the bottom of page number 23. So here, all property issued from yourself as the responsible officer. You can see that in the upper right-hand corner, like you can see that in the upper, not right-hand corner, excuse me, left-hand corner, because I'm pointing to where it says responsible officer. So that's a default setting. Hey, in Legacy, we actually have the name of the commander visible. In GCSS Army, it's just a default setting. Hey, take the time necessary to verify all supply transactions between yourself and the appropriate sub-hand receipt holder during the time frame by which you've designated that all sub-hand receipts be updated. Ensure the following. All right, let me pause there. So let me see if I can. So now I have a portable document file, a PDF file. Let me see if I can export this. So I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go Save as Other. And let's see. How about instead of Save as Other, let's go Export To. So you can see Microsoft Word. And I'm going to choose Word Document. All right, I'm going to save that Word document to my desktop. All right, and then once that Word document opens, I'll show you how your sub-hand receipt holders can very easily and very quickly just make modification to the header. So I apologize, I'm trying to multitask here as I'm working through this lesson. So I want to stop momentarily and I want to talk about updates. If you're on active duty, generally speaking, your property book officers are going to require that you re-sign your primary hand receipt every single month. That's what I'm accustomed to in the culture that I grew up in from an active duty perspective. National Guard or Reserve, it's my understanding that that process generally happens quarterly. But I want to talk about methodologies, and I can promise you, if you follow this methodology, you'll never lose as a commander. They sign first, you sign last. We'll talk about during the inventory process how critical that methodology is. Let's imagine you follow suit and you incorporate what it is that I'm telling you. So now it's time for updates. So you're going to go through the steps that I've included on the bottom of page number 23. We'll do that first, and then I'll come back and make modification to this Word document. All right, so as you're designating that time frame by which all sub-hand receipts be updated, my recommendation to you is that you do the following. So here we go. Number one, that both yourself and the sub-hand receipt holder compare the previously signed sub-hand receipt to the current sub-hand receipt to verify that all property book transactions have been correctly posted. Hey, here's a recommendation. Have both yourself and the sub-hand receipt holder initial each page of the sub-hand receipt to prove that the necessary verifications were made. Okay, so for example, this document includes 15 pages. Hey, you have to incorporate some sort of mechanism which really ensures that everybody is looking at each one of these pages and not arbitrarily going to page 15 to sign. Hey, that the sub-hand receipt holder signs the sub-hand receipt holder statement, and I'm making that statement available to you on SharePoint. In essence, what that statement says is I, the undersigned, certify that all property listed on this sub-hand receipt is accounted for and no accountability discrepancies exist. Number 2, in the body of that document says, in addition, I certify that all property for which I am directly responsible for has been further sub-hand receipted to the lowest possible level. I will tell you that statement in and of itself, and it's not a regulatory requirement, it's my recommendation to you as a commander, is going to protect you in many different ways. I think I may have shared this with you earlier. If I didn't, let me say it now. Based on all of my years of doing this, I think there's 2 primary reasons why commanders fail in this area. One is they're not sub-hand receipting equipment. 2, they're not conducting proper inventories. So now, question for you, let it be thought-provoking. What is it that you're going to do as a commander to ultimately protect your own financial interests? I think collectively we would agree, hey, a FLIPL, financial liability investigation or property loss at the end of your tenure as a commander, it's not going to play out well. And I think there's many things that you can do during your tenure as a commander to avoid that from happening. So as you're going through the process of updating, be mindful of what's on page 23. Number 4 on the top of page number 24, I've run across this personally, and I would hope that you're not the person who does this. Property is issued from yourself as the responsible officer. Never should you allow the supply sergeant to sign this sub-hand receipt on your behalf. I've seen a lot of that. I've seen those energetic supply sergeants convince their commanders, hey, just let me sign on your behalf. I can do that because I have custodial responsibility. Now, that's a wrong answer. You're the responsible officer. You're responsible for that equipment. You're the person who's issuing that equipment to your subordinates. Even though that supply sergeant is doing the work, ultimately, it's on you. All right, so let's kind of end this lesson by looking at the sub-hand receipt that I now exported to Microsoft Word. And now, if you notice here, if I double-click on the header, now I have the ability to change from responsible officer to maintenance, PL, Second Lieutenant Jones, right? And now Jones can say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and take that equipment, and I'm going to further assign that equipment to maintenance, PSG, and that's Sergeant First Class Edwards. Undoubtedly, that's going to be a lot easier to execute than spending countless hours typing 15 pages worth of a manual hand receipt, a DA form 2062. So I think I'm going to say this for the very first time. I may repeat myself in other lessons. But what are your best business practices going to look like as a commander? Property accountability is difficult because it's time consuming. You guys know that to be true because, again, I think you were immersed in the process. But you got to take a hard look at your policies and procedures, and you got to question whether or not they're beneficial to yourself and your subordinate leaders. So all that I'm doing is I'm trying to make this thought-provoking. Maybe I'm introducing you to something that you haven't yet explored. And if you haven't explored it, if you were that guy that went back and created those manual hand receipts, that's okay. Let's see how we can change the landscape going forward. All right, so having said that, that brings this particular lesson to a close. When we come back, the next thing that we're going to start doing is we're going to start getting into the management of components. So now we're going to be at a very, very critical lesson, because this is where a lot of the failure is going to happen for those commanders. So I value your time. Again, hopefully this was beneficial, and I will see you guys momentarily.